Okay, Genesis 33:1. Now remember, Jacob's making his way back home, back to the land of Canaan, and he has to deal with Esau. And that's where we are at this point. It says, and Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. That's the rough part. He sees 400 men, no women, no children. That's an army, you know. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two female servants. That's Bilhah and Zilpah. And he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times, until he came near to his brother. So he looks out, he sees Esau coming with all these men. And as I said, that would be very unnerving, because you don't know his intentions. Is he coming to kill everybody? What's he doing? We find out later that he's not. He's coming, bringing those men to protect Jacob and his family. Now, as always, even though Jacob knows God will protect him, even though God showed him an entire camp of angel warriors, he still takes matters into his own hands and makes everybody feel wonderful, because he takes the servants and their kids and puts them in the front in case Esau's going to start killing people so that Rachel and Joseph can get away. So how would you like to be them? You and your kids up front. You and your kids next. Then Leah and her kids, and then Rachel in the back. You know? And so, again, he's reinforcing how he really feels about everybody. Now, fortunately, he at least is brave enough that he goes in front of everybody. So if Esau wants to kill him, he can kill him and perhaps leave everybody else alone. But does he need to do any of that? No. God has shown him over and over by example, by supernatural, by all these things, and yet Jacob still has to insert himself and do things according to his way. So he still reverts to his own plans. You know, he just got done wrestling with God, surviving all night, receiving another blessing, and it doesn't matter. He's still going to take matters into his own hands. So, like I said, at least he's brave enough to go out in front of everybody. And then he really humbles himself. He bows down before Esau 7 times. That's, remember, the word 7 has to do with perfection. We call that the God number. And he does that 7 times until he gets close to him. And so at least we find that Jacob doesn't have a huge ego. He is able to humble himself, you know, and bow down before Esau. Now, it might have a lot to do with it that he's trying to save his life, but still, you know, he's able to do it. So, and then I have this is them reconciling. Jacob is bowing down and coming up to him, but what does it say in verse 4? But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him. Not what Jacob was expecting from this meeting. And they wept. Kind of hard for me to imagine Esau weeping, what we know about him. But yet, he's that moved that he's there. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, who are these with you? Now remember, when Jacob left, what did he have? Nothing. What he could carry, that's it. Now there's all these servants, all these children and wives and animals and all this stuff. And remember, he already sent gifts ahead that have already come to Esau. You know, hundreds of animals in different groups. Huge gifts. I mean, hundreds of animals was more than most people would ever have in a lifetime. And yet for Jacob, it's a gift he can give away and doesn't impact him at all because he has so many. So, Jacob said, we're in verse 5, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. Then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last, Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. So at this point, we have 11 of the 12 fathers of Israel. The only one we're missing is Benjamin. He's not born yet. And he will be born in the near future. So Jacob is happily, now, I'm guessing that when Esau took off running, Jacob still had no idea what he was going to do. And it might have scared him because it's like he's running to kill me, you know. But he's happily surprised that he embraces him, kisses him, weeps on him, you know, things he never expected. And they both weep at finding each other again. Because remember, they're twins. I think a lot of times we forget they're twins. And twins have a connection nobody else has. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure Esau was lonely and had some issues during this time, as well as Jacob, and they're finally back together. Because, you know, with twins, I I don't know if you've ever seen some of the things that twins can be separated by thousands of miles, and if one gets hurt, the other one can tell. It's this weird thing about the human brain that's just another part of that mystery we don't understand.
Even when they're separated.
What's that?
Even when they're separated.
That's what I mean. Yeah, even if they're separated by thousands of miles, you know, it doesn't matter. They can somehow tell.
No, I mean, even.
Oh, separated birth, you mean? Yeah. Even when they don't know they have a twin.
Right.
Yeah, sometimes they can tell. So the most interesting one I saw was, it was in a video of unusual teenagers. And this family had twins. One is white and one is black.
I saw that.
And I mean white. You know, like really almost albino white and then black. And these poor girls, when they tell people they're twin sisters, not only do they not look alike, they're totally different colors, you know, but that can happen.
What is the chance of that?
It's like 1 in several trillion, probably.
Really?
You know, it happens now and then, you know, but not very often.
Then you're even saying that there was possibly 2 different fathers.
You know, so.
But they proved that wrong.
But there's other families, you know, those genes are in there. Whether you're white or black doesn't matter. In there are the genes for other color. And if they get expressed, you know, black people can have white kids and white people can have dark-skinned kids. It doesn't happen very often because they're what they're called recessive genes. But yet it still does, you know, if they get activated. So it also goes to show you that color has nothing to do with anything, other than it's a one teeny portion of our DNA that codes for color, how much melanin you have in your skin, type of thing. And by the way, there's no such thing as races. There's no like black race, there's what the human race, that's it. That's exactly it. Just the human race. So Jacob's happily surprised because Esau doesn't want to kill him. Not only that, he seems truly excited and happy that he's back. It's been 20 years and Esau got over it. And like I said, Esau has his own country, his own wealth, his own family, all that stuff. So Esau had no intentions of doing Jacob harm. And like I said, I think he brought the 400 men for protection, you know, to help with whatever needs to be done. Because later on we're going to find he offers the men to go along with Jacob as protection. Now Jacob turns it down, but I believe that's why. Because remember I told you before, traveling in those days was quite dangerous. It really was. And you needed armed men in order to be safe. So now Esau sees 4 different groups of people, you know, separated by space coming at him with kids and mothers, you know, that type of thing. And he's wondering who they are because, as we said, when Jacob left, he had nothing. Now he comes back with this huge family and all this wealth and animals and servants and so on and so forth. So everyone is safe. Jacob is finally reconciled with his estranged brother. So finally, Jacob's got his issues with Laban have been resolved. You know, basically, we won't pass that mound of rocks and harm you, and you won't pass it and harm us. And in reality, they're probably never going to see each other again because they live very far apart. Now he's reconciled with Esau. So a lot of stress has been taken out of Jacob's life at this point. And Esau's gotten over it, but you're going to find that Jacob still isn't very trusting. So, chapter 33, verse 8. Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company that I met?" And he means the gifts that were sent ahead. Jacob answered, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Jacob said, "No, please, if I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Please accept my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough." Thus he urged him, and he took it. So there's 2 very interesting statements in here that humans don't normally say very often. You know what it is?
Have enough.
I have enough. Absolutely. It's very interesting to see that Esau, who felt cheated out of everything, the inheritance, the blessing, now can say, "I have enough. I'm fine. I'm good." You know. And Jacob, the one that surprises us, who says, "I have enough." Before, we didn't think that there was ever going to be enough for Jacob. But now Jacob is finally, he's learning. It's slow, but he's learning. He says, "I have enough." In fact, he's basically saying, "I have so much, I can give you that, and it doesn't impact me in any way." The hundreds and hundreds of animals that he gave. So Esau's at first confused by all this, and now he knows what's going on. I think this shows great maturity on Esau's part. I don't need it, you keep it, I have enough, it's okay. He's not the hot-tempered young man that he used to be, type of thing. So, and God's blessed him as well. He's had 12 sons, and he has his own nation. And so I think he had 12, but he had a lot of sons. And they're all chieftains of their own tribes, and they have taken over the land of Seir, and it's now called Edom, which means red because it's a lot like Sedona, where there's red rocks everywhere. The cliffs and stuff are red. So, let's see. Jacob talks him into keeping the presents. And I think part of what Jacob might be doing here is kind of trying to repay Esau for what he took from him, in the beginning when he stole his birthright and then the blessing, the inheritance and then the blessing. And in fact, and Esau's not angry. He's overjoyed to be reunited with his only brother. So Jacob's trying to make it right, and everything's good. Now verse 12. Then Esau said, "Let us journey on our way, and I will go ahead of you." Meaning, like, to make the path safe with my 400 men. But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the nursing flocks and herds are a care to me. If they are driven hard for one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly, at the pace of the livestock there that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir." So Esau said, "Let me leave with you some of the people who are with me." But he said, "What need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord." So we hear what Jacob's saying, but what's he really saying?
Yeah.
I don't trust you. You're nice today, but what about tomorrow? Are you going to wake up and remember that I stole everything and you're going to kill me? So even with all that God has done, Jacob still has a hard time trusting. And he doesn't trust Esau at all, because Esau wants to just leave some men to protect him. And he doesn't want that either. And so he wants Esau gone, and then he'll be safe, or feel safe. And you'll find out as we go on, he doesn't go down to Edom where Esau's from. He goes a whole different direction instead of going that direction. And his excuse is that, all the animals can't go fast. You want them to eat as they go, or they'll lose a lot of weight. Some of the mothers are having babies. We got to wait for that. Then the babies can't go real fast. And then there's the other kids. Because remember, it's not just his kids. He has servants who have children. His kids are riding on camels or donkeys, things like that. But the others are walking, and you can't. The men can go much faster. Military men can go much, much faster. And so that's, he's tricky. He's smart. That's his excuse, so that Esau will go on ahead of him. But again, he's taking matters into his own hands. I think that's one of the greatest examples we get out of Jacob. And I think what's so important about it is because it is such a common thing for us as humans. We constantly want to take matters into our own hands. I also think that's part of why God doesn't tell us what's coming, because if he did, what would we do? We'd take matters into our own hands, try to prepare for it, and all this kind of stuff. And that's why part of why he doesn't tell us, what's going to happen, that type of thing.
Especially in lottery tickets.
So then we, and even if you've been a Christian a long time, it's still so easy to take matters into your own hands, and instead of letting God's will play out. Especially if it's something that you find uncomfortable or you don't like or whatever, and we want out of it, that type of thing.
But it's difficult. It becomes difficult for most, for me, I don't speak for anybody else, but when you want to do the right thing and you think it's this, and then something else is happening, so it's like you don't have the end result in mind. You're trying to make it better, but you try at your best. You try your best shot, and sometimes your best shot is not the right shot.
Correct. That's why what Michael's saying is that sometimes you do something you think is right, but it turns out not to be the thing that needs to be done. In fact, we just read the other night in Psalms where it says, "There's a way that seems right unto a man, but the end thereof is death." That's why we have to be so careful with doing things that we think are the right thing, rather than just saying, "God, make clear to me what you want done." Because sometimes, I've mentioned this before, sometimes we help people which seems like we're doing the right thing when God does not want us to help them. He's working in their lives, and they need to experience some things in order for them to change. And we intervene, and we're actually short-circuiting God's plan. That's why we have to be very, very careful that we seek God and His will and tell Him to make it very clear to us if He wants us to get involved and help this person. So we need to be very careful of that. The worst we do it with is our children. You know, one of the hardest things in the world for a pastor is to convince a parent to let their kid go to jail, to let their kid be homeless, those kinds of things, because that's where those people are going to change. But when mom and dad intervene, all that happens is the kid learns, well, I can live any way I want, and I'll never have to suffer the consequences because someone will always intervene. Until you're dead. The parents are, and the kid's now 60 and hasn't learned how to deal with any of this stuff. And now they have to. It's 100 times harder than learning when you're 16 and still have mom and dad to fall back on. So we have to be very careful with that. Grandchildren, anyone. Because very often God's at work the same way He works in our lives and other lives. So, okay, let's see. Well, so Jacob finally convinces Esau that he's okay and that he is fine to travel on by himself. At first, you can read that and think, oh, well, Jacob's finally getting some faith. Nope, he's scared of Esau. That's what's going on. You know? So now we're going to see where they're going to go. This is where they are, right in this area. Jacob has come up this way. Edom's down here. Esau's come up here. Remember, they met by the Jabbok River is the area that they met in for this. So look at verse 16. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. So he just heads right back down again. And here the Bible uses the original name, Seir. It's also the land of Edom. But Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the name of the place is called Succoth. See, it's interesting. It says he went to Succoth, but it's not named Succoth until he gets there. But as I said, God uses the names that will be later used that everybody would recognize. And so here's where they go, is to Succoth, this area right here. Okay? Now, Esau goes south. Jacob kind of made it sound like he was going to go meet him down there, but instead he goes this way. But also remember, who does he want to see most of all? His father and mother, who are still alive. And they're over here somewhere. So that's where he's headed now. But he stops in Succoth, and it gets its name because he builds booths. The word Succoth means booths.
Isn't that desert, Succoth?
This area right here,
Yeah.
it's grazing land. See the light green all around out
It
here?
mentions that he built like corrals for his livestock and
Yes.
his house. Where would that lumber come
Well, he may have built them a lot out of stone, number one, a small amount of lumber. There are some trees, like along the Jordan,
from? Yes.
you know, that kind of stuff. Although Israel actually doesn't have great trees for building. They're not straight where you can cut a lot of lumber out of them. They're more desert trees type of thing. And that's why so much lumber came out of Mount Lebanon, the Lebanon cedars. But there was wood they could get, you know, to build things with.
What about olive trees?
There's olive trees, but if you've ever looked at an olive tree, they don't make good lumber. They're very branchy.
Gnarly.
You know, there's not a big trunk that you can cut into boards. Besides that, those are usually cultivated trees that people are growing to grow olives with. So you wouldn't cut them down unless they weren't producing anymore. But there were, and remember, in this day and age, there were way more trees in Israel than today. Because Israel was actually covered in trees at one time, mostly. It was the land of milk and honey. It was very different than the Israel we see today. Very different. You know, they could grow enormous crops. Remember, one bunch of grapes, and this is in the future from this point. You know, when they come back 400 plus years from now to actually come back and take the land under Joshua, the spies go in and they come back and they say a bunch of grapes are so huge it takes 2 men to carry it on a pole. You know, and everything is enormous that's grown there. But what happened is the Syrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Romans, the Greeks, they all attacked Israel. And when they built siege machines, where did they get the lumber? They cut down all the trees. Where did they get firewood for their armies? They cut down all the trees. So over time, Israel lost 80+% of its trees, and that made the climate change to a much drier, hotter climate than it used to be. That's why Israel has had for a long time a plan of planting trees. They're trying to get back to the trees that they had way back in time, and would also help change the climate. And this, I saw this 20+ years ago. They had planted over 1 million trees in Israel. And so they have a huge plan of doing that. So I'll say, so he comes to this area. This is, to me, very interesting because he comes to this area of Sukkoth. It doesn't have that name. It doesn't have any name. There's really nothing there until he builds himself a house. Now, he's a nomad. He's never had a house before. He's lived in tents, because you have to move with the animals all the time. And all of a sudden here, for reasons we're not told, he builds a house, which means he's going to stay there for some period of time. You don't go to that much work if you're just going to move on. And not only does he build a house, as Larry said, he builds, they call them booths, but they're basically stalls for his animals. And now imagine the number of animals he has. Think about the amount of stalls he has to build, the amount of barns he has to build. It's an enormous undertaking. So he must stay there for some time or come back, like use that as his base and maybe move out and come back on a continual basis. But for reasons not explained, he builds all these booths and a home. And let's see, and that's where it gets its name, because the Hebrew word for booth is Sukkoth. Just like they have the festival of Sukkot, the festival of booths later on. And so he does this, and then he gives it the name. From that point forward, it's called Sukkoth, the place of booths. Well, let's see what happens next. If I can get my page to turn here. Okay, verse 18. And Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Padan Aram, and he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. Now see, now he's back in a tent. Doesn't tell us how long he was at Sukkoth, but it had to be for some period of time, or there's no point in building these buildings. And maybe it's just a time of resting, because they've traveled a long ways with these animals. But Padan Aram is way up there, hundreds and hundreds of miles. And it's all by foot, traveling. And maybe it's more of a time to recover, that type of thing. And so they make it there, and then, now, because they're still not in the land of Canaan. They're on the east side of the Jordan River. The land of Canaan is the west side of the Jordan River. And Israel was actually never supposed to have land over here. This was the promised land. But when they come, remember Manasseh and others say, we like the land up here in what's called Goshen, because it's great rangeland, great animal area. Mm-hmm. And they ask if they can have it, and God says, yeah, you can. But the original plan was just this side. Because what this does, it separates the groups of the Israelites, which means this group over here over time will change in comparison to this group, because crossing rivers is very difficult. And so you don't do it often. And what happens when two people groups are separated? They begin to change. They begin to pick up different idioms in their language. That's why God really didn't want them separated. But he allowed it. Remember, there's God's perfect will and sometimes what we call God's permissive will, meaning he will allow us sometimes some things. And sometimes he allows us things that he knows aren't good for us, but we won't listen, so he gives it to us anyway. And then we learn the hard way. Like when you want some truck or car horribly bad, and you go get the 7-year loan on it that's $800 a month, and after about 2 months you go, yeah, this is not a good idea.
I've never done that.
Kind of thing, or buy a house that's way more than you can afford, and things that people do. God tries everything to stop us, but eventually he'll let us have what we ask, so we'll learn. And we don't make that mistake again. So he needs to cross in, because way back in Padan Aram, where did God tell him to go? Back to the land of Canaan. So he needs to enter into the land. And it's interesting because Jericho is in this area. That's the way the Jews eventually come in as well. They come in through the east to the west, as Jacob's doing now. Only he doesn't cross at Jericho. He crosses at this city called Shechem, which is not an Israelite city. There aren't any real Israelites yet. They're just starting. So Hamor and his son Shechem, that it apparently named after, are Canaanites. So, and then bad stuff happens from here. Let's see, where am I? Oh, and remember it tells us that he bought the land that his tent sat on. So he bought a piece of land, again, for reasons that aren't explained, outside of Shechem. He's a nomad. He's going to move around, but yet he now owns this piece of land. And so that caused me to think back, that's in the wrong place. I thought I moved it to the right place. Okay. Let's see. There's a map here that I need up. No, I can't find my mouse. There it is. Okay, let me go. This is what I need. Is it up there? Okay. What I put this up here for was because, just to show you, he bought land here, but do you remember that Abraham had purchased land as well? Remember, he purchased the cave of Machpelah and the land around it as a burial place, as a tomb, where he wanted to be married. That's down here. So now, the Israelites own 2 pieces of land in the land of Canaan. They don't have the whole land yet, but they got a toehold. They've got 2 pieces of land that God has motivated them to purchase. Let's see. I'm trying to. I hate it when I do this. I got up this morning and looked through here and saw one of my slides was out of order, and I moved it, but it doesn't look like I put it on my notes. Okay. Let's see. All right. All right, so he bought the land for 100 pieces of money, it says. Most likely that was 100 pieces of silver. Gold, by the way, in history was rarely used for money. It's used as a repository of wealth, but it's not used as money. That's silver. Silver was much more commonly used as money. And in fact, they often called it cut silver because they would take a silver bracelet and break a part of it off to pay for something. And that's why most merchants had the scales, and they could weigh the silver and, give you the value of it, that type of thing. And this is where I told you before, where empires came in very handy, because here you've just got a bunch of cities. There's no empire. There's no central organization. So what you paying here could be dramatically different than here. Everywhere's different. And you don't know if you're getting ripped off or not. But silver was much more common as a way of spendable money. And that's even true today. If the economy collapsed and we were going back to, money to metals, you'd be more likely to buy something with silver than gold that's worth $200 an ounce. Here, I want this pack of gum. Here's an ounce of gold. It's worth $2,000. So rather than silver that's worth $25 right now, I think, something like that. So and that's a lot of money, 100 pieces of silver. That's a fair amount of money. It gives us some idea of the wealth that Jacob has, that he can just go buy this piece of land. It's no big deal. And he buys it from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father. So there's other brothers and stuff. And where he pitched his tent, he now owns that. Nobody can tell him to get off it, whatever. And also, one of the things you find that's interesting is back in this day and age, they filled out contracts and bills of sale. And they had places where you could put these things to prove you owned a piece of land. And, we kind of think of it just as you sell it to me, I buy it from you, I say that it's mine, and that's it. No, they had records just like we do today. And they had places where you would keep those records to find out who owned that piece of land. What they usually did was they filled out 2 contracts. And one of them was sealed with a wax stamp. And then that went into wherever their repository is, and you kept one. And that way, if somebody ever tried to doctor the contract and say it was theirs, you could go and pull out the original, break the seal, and say, no, you doctored this. Okay, so they actually had all of those kinds of things as we do today. And it really wasn't that different. And that's what we find a lot of, archaeologically speaking, when we go in. Rather than finding the things they want to tell you about people's daily lives, that's not what people record. They record receipts, how much you paid for things, how much grain you got in, that type of stuff. It was more like inventories and things of that nature. And then from that, we have to extrapolate how their lives were by what they bought and moved around and so on and so forth. Let's see. There was a question. Now, the end of this is very interesting. In verse 20, it says, there on this land, he erected an altar. This is a big deal with Jacob. He's put these things all over the place, hasn't he? It's in Bethel. It's all over. You know, everywhere he meets God or something happens, he sets up some kind of altar. So it says that he goes and he erected an altar and he gives it this name, El Elohe Israel. What that means is God, the God of Israel. It means El is the God of Israel. So it's the God of Israel for the Hebrews. I thought I wrote down here exactly. Oh, God, the God of Israel. That's what it means. If you remember, I told you that El, the name El, that is a generic term for any God in the Middle East. It was in all kinds of different peoples had the name El. But here, what Jacob is doing and what God is doing through Jacob, he sets up this altar and he specifically says from now on in the Israelite people and the Hebrew language, El doesn't mean any generic name for God. It means the God of Israel. So from this point forward, when they use the term El, it specifically means the God of Israel. And so you'll see it pop up in different places. Just like the name of Bethel, Beth El, a place where he met God. And this is where he formalizes that from this point forward, El, for us, will mean the one true God, not just the gods of all these other peoples, type of thing. Oh, let's see, where are we? Okay. But that's an important point that we want to pull out there, because we'll see this El pop up in other places. Chapter 34. Look at how we're flying along. I made it through an entire chapter. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, now we're told what kind of people they are. They're Canaanites, but they're specifically Hivites. Everybody that lives in this land is called a Canaanite. But that's made up of a bunch of different people groups. There's Jebusites, Hivites, all kinds of different peoples here. But they're generally collectively called Canaanites. So you'll see that kind of interchanged as we go through. It says, verse 2, when Shechem the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. So what does that tell us? What did he do? He raped her. Yep. He liked her, so he raped her. Okay, and his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, get me this girl for my wife. I find this, I would love to know what the conversation was and such that went on here. Don't tell me that. I have gotten my stuff still out of sequence. It's amazing. Okay, that's Shechem and Dinah. I missed a verse. Now, remember, we've heard of Dinah before. Women's names don't just pop up like this. That she was mentioned previously, because remember I told you, if a woman's name gets mentioned, it's because there's something important about her coming up in the life of Israel. Other than that, they really don't get named. We were named Dinah back here in Genesis 30. It said afterward, this is Leah that we're talking about. She bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. Now, she couldn't have been the only daughter. I highly doubt that. She's just the only one that's named because there's something important. This event that we're talking about here, where she gets humiliated, she gets raped. And then what comes out of that? So, and then we have Shechem and didn't work. Oops, I'm in the wrong place, I guess. And then we have them here. What I find very interesting here is what is he saying to her? When it says he spoke tenderly, what he just did to her? I mean, what do you come in and say to this person? Oh, I love you so much. Well, she's over there crying because of, what you did type of thing. And the interesting thing is he truly loves her. Notice how the Bible describes it, his soul. Not just his emotions, it actually describes his soul longs for her. Everything in his being longs for her. He would have been a lot smarter if he had just gone and asked to marry her in the first place. But what you also have to remember is, remember women's place during this time. You're just a property, almost like a slave. Therefore, for a man to do this amongst these people who have no moral standards, to him it's no big deal. To her it is. But to him, it's no big deal. And to the other men around him, it's no big deal. You know, that type of thing. Especially if he'll marry her. You know, that type of issue that's going on here. But it just shows you that, you know, I don't think we can really, because of our experience here in America being based on the Bible and also being Christians, we really have no concept of what life was like in a time where there was no moral standard. It's for each person to decide, you know. And there are some things that are what we call the natural law, inherent to humans that God put in us. And this is one of them. You know, things like abusing women, raping women, so on and so forth. Sharing your wife with someone that, even without the Bible, that nobody's gone for that. Adultery, murder. Those things have always been considered wrong. This drives philosophers literally insane. Because, see, if we all evolved just from animals, there's no way there should be this common natural law that goes through all humans across all time, across all cultures, whether you're a primitive people in South America or Brazil, or you're sophisticated people in America and Europe. We all have certain things that we consider wrong. Yeah, Deb?
Then why were her brothers so upset?
Because they're Israelites. They have a whole different set of rules. And that's kind of the point, was God had given them moral commands and rules to live by. They're not written down yet. That's not till Moses, but they're there. Remember, we talked about people knew how to worship God all the way back to Cain and Abel. It's not like it just suddenly was, you know, came out during Moses' time. No, it was the whole time. It's just it wasn't written down yet. It wasn't codified into the laws of Israel yet. But yet it was there. And also, you know, their sister's been humiliated. You'll find out as we go through, they're not nearly as concerned about her being raped as about the effect it has on them as a people. That, you know, it says they have no regard for them as a people, more so than what happened to Dinah, type of thing. But like I said, this is just one of those weird situations that I want to know what actually went on here when he's like trying to convince her to marry him and talking tenderly to her and all that kind of stuff.
He doesn't really care about her. He cares about his emotions.
Well, he let lust overtake him. He really does care for her. The Bible says
but what I'm
his
saying
very
is,
soul
I
loves
don't
her.
know. There's something here that's weird. There's something very weird.
It's just
he raped her, and he thought it was cool. Now he feels guilty because what she's going to think about him, but he really doesn't care.
well, it's just a whole different mindset. It's something we can't really wrap our brains around because we don't have anything to compare to in our world.
It's just too weird.
Where am I? So what happens, you know, is Dinah decides to leave the camp of the Jews, the land that they bought where their tents are, and just go visit the ladies of Shechem and probably do a little shopping and that kind of stuff. And this is what happens to her. Remember I told you before, life was very dangerous back then. There are no police. None of that exists. You know, and so it was, and now we see why it's dangerous. Because any man could have done this. And it happened all the time in these cities. You know, if you saw some woman you liked, you just grabbed her. You know, and she didn't really have much to say about it. That time, especially someone like him. What did it say he was? He's a prince. You know, they really get to do what they want, and that doesn't change from then till now. You know, a whole different set of rules for them. And just remember that all the false gods, none of them put any moral constraints at all on the people. That's how you can tell it's a man-made religion. Christianity is the only belief system, all Judaism and Christianity, where the text from the God is filled with morals. The Bible has more on that than anything in the world. All of their gods, all they cared about was if you brought the right sacrifices at the right time and kept the gods happy, live however you want. Because what were the gods doing? They were getting drunk, they were fighting, they were committing incest, they were committing adultery, they did all the things that the humans do. Again, tells you that's got to be a false man-made God because they're just like us. But shouldn't a God be very different than us if they're actually a God? And that's why the God of the Bible is so different. He puts moral constraints on us. More moral constraints than any other thing in the universe, in existence in time. And the part that most people dislike the most about the Bible. It says one man, one woman for life. You know, Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. Put the needs of others before your own. And on, I mean, that's the opposite of the way humanity normally thinks. And yet the Bible's filled with all of these rules and commands of morals of how to live and how to live properly. And societies that are governed by what the Bible says are much happier, freer than any other societies around, by far, if we follow the rules God gave. So we have to end there. We're out of time.